not grown. Now, actually, most of them have been decimated in the last 60 years, but up until 60 years ago, they lived in North and South Africa, up until about 60 years ago, their population had been stable. These are hunter-gatherer people. They live in a population that's say about 100 people per square mile, and they have been that way for functional, in human terms. And they are not unique in this. Of the roughly 5,000 unique cultures around the world, with unique languages and unique religions and worldviews, about 4,000 of them are indigenous Aboriginal tribal people whose populations have not grown at all in thousands and thousands of years. That story of the explosion of population is the story really of one culture, or one uber culture with thousands of little microcultures within it. It's the culture that we call Western culture by and large, although you can apply it in China to Eastern culture if you want to differentiate. I'd say it's all become one. It's the culture of written language, it's the culture of machinery, it's the culture of political hierarchy. And what we find is that first of all, is the culture that has exploded in population across the planet. So the problem of global warming, the problem of deforestation, the problem of overpopulation, the problem of poisoning the planet lies in the heart of that culture, first of all. If it's going to be solved, it has to be solved at the level of that culture. That our problems are not problems of technology, they're not problems of population, frankly, they're not problems of too much carbon dioxide, and those are all real, those are symptoms. The problem is the way we think. So what is it that controls population? Well, there's two stories that have been put forward historically over the last 100 years that people have been seriously concerned about population. Mostly since the 1970s, 1972 I think it was, and the population bomb was first published. What is it that controls population? Turns out the two stories that were proposed, one is technological, the other is economic. The technological story is that what controls population is access to birth control technology. That if we simply put bubblegum machines with birth control pills on every corner and every slum in the world, we didn't have to put money in, you just turn the crank and get the pills, that we'd solve the problem. Well, there is a very real problem, a technological problem. There's a lack of availability of birth control. Planned Parenthood says there's somewhere between 400 and 700 million families or people in the world who would like to have access to birth control technology and don't. But that's not enough to be producing the problem that we have. And there are many countries in the world, particularly if you look around the Middle East, the Gulf states, very wealthy Gulf states that are fully technologically developed, fully modern states, where the average family size is 8, 10, 11. And they have full access to birth control, and there's no cultural or religious prescription of it. Law against it. So that's a problem, but that's not the problem. So then come the economic folks, and they say, oh, no, this is a problem for the economists to fix. Because you'll notice that when a country reaches a certain level of wealth, they go to zero population growth. Look at what happened in Western Europe. Look at what happened in Japan. Look at what happened in North America among the middle class. Population growth started to level off, and in many cases has actually gone negative. I always find it interesting. The country in Europe, and it may well be the country in the world, that has the highest rate of use of birth control and the lowest rate of growth of population right now is Italy, where the Vatican is located. Go figure. In any case, Berlusconi is very concerned about it. So he's trying to make more babies. He keeps appointing these 20-something passion models to his cabinet. For those of you who hear our Berlusconi words, get the joke. For those of you who don't listen to the show. In any case, So the economists say all we have to do is bring everybody in the world up to the economic standard of, say, the poverty level in the United States. A family of four, $14,400 a year. The problem with that, given the fact that nearly half the population of the world lives on less than $5 a day, and more than a third of the population of the world lives on less than $2 a day, is that to raise 7 billion people to that level of income would require the natural resources of 4 planet Earths. It's a physical impossibility. Plus, it wouldn't solve the problem. Because again, you can go to Bahrain, you can go to the United Arab Emirates, which by the way has the distinction of having the largest carbon footprint of any planet on Earth on a per capita basis, any country on Earth. And what you will find is great wealth. People given $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year just for being citizens. It's like the socialist state of Alaska, where everyone gets a $2,000 a year check from the government for the oil revenue. I had so much fun when I was in Alaska. We went to Anchorage a couple of weeks ago because the radio station just put our station on live. And I had the newly elected Republican mayor of Anchorage in the studio. And I said, so, what do you think about these checks from the oil revenue that Sarah Palin, signs and very happily passes out to everybody in the state? He says, we think it's a great thing. And I said, in the rest of the world, they call that socialism. And he says, well, I guess a little socialism isn't bad. The next day in the newspaper, they ripped the skin off this guy. Anyway, you look at countries like the UAE, and you find that even though they're rich, they're still having 10 kids. So that's not it. So what is it? Well, it turns out that the one thing that actually changes the population growth rate in a culture is very identifiable, very measurable, and actually very controllable. And that is the relative level of power between women and men. In those cultures where men have all the power and women are basically the property of men, populations explode. In those cultures where the power of women approaches that or equals that of men, and we certainly haven't reached equality in our culture by any means, but we've gotten past whatever that magical tipping point is. I'm not quite sure exactly where it is. This is an area of great scientific fascination right now. When there's a certain point you hit, and bang, population growth goes to zero, or even goes negative in a country that's arguably overpopulated. And so, in a very real way, you could say that the women's rights movement around the world is the most important of all. And because that's going to drive down population, which is one of the cardinal calls for action in my book, Threshold. And the reason why is because it's perhaps the easiest example of how, again, if we're going to save the world, if we're going to change things, if we're going to rescue ourselves from, if we're going to step back from these thresholds, we have to do it by changing the way we think, by changing our culture. Our culture is this collection of stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, where we fit in the world relative to each other, relative to animal life, relative to plant life, relative to the planet, relative to the cultures, genders, relative to each other. We have to change that. And so if we recalibrate those stories, if we start telling ourselves, instead of the story, the kind of Reagan era story of we're a me society and greed is good and greed always produces the greatest outcome and there should be no rules and markets, all that kind of BS. And instead say, no, we're a we society. We are wired as collaborators. We have democracy in our DNA. We are genetically made, designed to be cooperative. Tens of thousands of years of human history demonstrates this culture after culture after culture. One of the examples of book Threshold is the